All right, guys, it's recap time. Let's hit it. All right, again, guys, thanks for all the comments, really good engagement. Thanks to Einstein Motors for bringing this. And as I predicted, all the 4-valve guys are like, no, LSA is not important. The 2-valve guys are like, Jake, you're all over it 100%. And this comes down to lift ratios and how aggressive the camshafts are. And I've really seen this probably 15 years ago when we actually started testing custom camshafts over what you buy on the shelf. You know, your standard 272 with 9mm lift. The LSA, they're so doughy and so forgiving, but once you get into a camshaft and a shimless bucket, and we're just talking the RB stuff, or any of the guys that have played with Rocker Advantage SRs, the Hondas and stuff like that. And it's funny, I was watching Dave from Skunk 2 Racing sent me one of his podcasts. They run a podcast called Technical Difficulties. You can look it up. I think it's on YouTube. And Jay said, you know, that if everyone had to go NA, you'd work out really quickly who knows what they're doing. And I found it surprising in the comments that the 2-valve guys knew exactly what I meant about how important this overlap was. But yeah, I really seen it when we got into our custom profiles, actually making them get an area under the lobe, getting the velocity ramp as quick as we could. You got to remember, when companies build camshafts, they build them for reliability. And that's the other thing a lot of people don't understand when it comes to ramp rates and making horsepower. And we're really starting to see that in the boosted scene now. Because in the early days, it was just ram boost in, don't worry about lift, just keep throwing as much boost as you can at it. Where now we've learned, again, boost is a restriction, so we need to improve the volumetric efficiency of the NA engine. And this is how we actually fill the cylinder properly and start reducing that pressure ratio and increase our horsepower per PSI. So instead of making 1,000 horsepower at 45 pound, we're now making it at 30 PSI. It gives us a better tuning window and more room to move, right? But when you're looking at these camshafts as far as ramp speeds go, manufacturers selling their, you know, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 aren't going to give them massive ramp rates because it is so hard on the valve train. The faster we start lifting the valve, the more stable the spring is, the more money you need to spend, the quicker it's going to wear the camshaft out as well, and the more problems you could have. We see this in time attack cars with ignition cut sequential gearboxes. The sequential hit is so severe on the engine that it can break DLC coatings, it can snap camshafts, it'll wipe the nose off the camshafts, especially if you start going under that 180 160 thou nose radius with like 2Js and RBs and stuff like that. So I want to cover a couple of things here, a couple more comments. We got some engineers in the comments, you know, oh, that's not the right terminology. Guys, we're trying to break this down for the average guy. So we're not going to be 100% or breaking down all the engineering principles to a university degree, because no guy will understand it. I had one guy carrying on in the comments about back pressure is simply low pressure fluid, the high pressure. No one's going to understand that. So try, if you're going to comment, please try and add value to the channel and break it down. What's actually happening with back pressure? What causes it? Is there a bottleneck? Is the velocity too high? Explain it in layman's terms so all of us can understand, especially guys that follow this channel. All right, let's get into it. All right, guys, before we start too, I wanted to clear another thing up. So again, I've got to stop dropping these little clippets of information without explaining the whole thing. I was talking about, and it's probably my dyslexic nature, I probably called it burn speed rather than flame speed, but someone in the comments said I was wrong about the methanol. Methanol needs more timing. He's 100% right. If I said burn speed, I can't remember if I did, and sorry if I did. What I'm actually talking about, and I'm going to do a quick breakdown. Again, I'm not a chemist. I usually get the best guys involved if we're dealing with fuels, and you'll see the further you go up the level, the more expert you'll get involved in projects. And we get some really, really good chemists in Australia, and I know a few guys over in the States that are absolutely brilliant with these different blends of fuel. So what I'm going to do is just explain what I was talking about really quickly, and how methanol actually reduces temperature due to its molecular simplicity and its flame speed at a molecular level, and where it actually struggles when we get into turbulence. And this introduces factors that they call the Lewis number effect and the Markstein length. Basically, gasoline's like a mixed soup of variable hydrocarbons. So it's almost like a bimetal steel when it comes to turbulent flow. Because it has such a different mix from C4 to C12, different types of hydrocarbons, some burn fast, some burn slow. So when we get really, really turbulent mixture and we start getting stretching, this is where the simpler fuel of methanol tends to break down and not have that stable flame front. So this is why methanol will have a faster total burn speed in a laminar event, but in a turbulent event, we can slow it down from anywhere from 12 to 25%, meaning we're going to need more timing or earlier timing if we want to hit the piston at the right timing after TDC, which again is around that 10 to 14 degrees and really, really short burn period, right? Generally by mid-bore, everything's over. We want the exhaust valve open and we want the gas out. But that's what I was sort of talking about. So I'm going to do a quick rundown on the two fuels and just try and give you a little bit of an idea of what's happening in there and the benefits of each. Again, gasoline tends to be more like a bimetal, blade or whatever. We have a carbon, which is very brittle, so it has very little yield, and a mild steel, and we mix the two so we get the best of both worlds. And when it comes to turbulent flow, because again methanol doesn't tend to deal with turbulence as good as gasoline does, and in some cases, depending on the dominant hydrocarbon, again the smaller carbon chains obviously burn faster and the bigger carbon chains will burn slower, obviously, because they're more complex. This is why methanol is a brilliant fuel. Also, it's self-oxidizing, so it's like pre-digested food already, if you want to go that way, because it has the OH in there. It already has oxygen in the fuel. Again, you'll hear people talking about oxygenated race fuels. The reason they're so great is because they already have an oxidizer in them to do that chain reaction. And as far as process goes, we've only got one carbon molecule. We've got built-in oxygen atoms. There's no diffusion delay in alcohol. So we'll get a quicker ignition. And this is what I was talking about as far as creating less temperature overall versus what it'll put into the engine. Again, the OH acts as an internal oxidizer. Single reaction path, really, really simple. Formaldehyde to carbon monoxide to carbon dioxide, basically. There's the chain breakdown. CH3O, C2O, CHO, CO, and CO2. Again, as soon as we heat methanol, it creates its own OH radicals, which again, on a laminar based, and I'll show the diagram here, you can see it's much faster, up to 45 meters per second, where gasoline's only 35. But the caveat comes in the dynamic element of turbulence. And because we're not getting a good homogenized mix, we need turbulence. So this is where the balancing act comes between methanol and gasoline. Now, gasoline, again, like I was talking about, gasoline isn't just gasoline like many people think. Again, it's made up with a multitude of complex hydrocarbons from, again, C4 to C12, even octane, it's a C8, H18, so it's a really, really complex thing. But basically, it's full of long chain carbon hydrocarbon molecules. It has no oxygen, which means it needs to find oxygen, and it needs far more oxygen than methanol does, which is another factor in its molecular burn speed. So again, sorry for the confusion, we're talking about two separate things: total burn duration or burn speed versus flame speed or molecular burning. So octanes must break down into multiple fragments. And again, this is where the Lewis number and everything improves with turbulence, with multitude of hydrocarbons, because as we stretch, and this is where methanol falls apart a little bit, where it struggles and why we see a drop in its total burn speed across, you know, the piston duration, the whole chamber, is once we start getting these eddies and we start pulling the fuel apart and the air molecules apart, we get this stretching inside the combustion chamber. Different hydrocarbons will compensate. So, and we can actually speed up that process because we have a multitude of different burn speeds. So some that are closer together will compensate for when the air is getting pulled away and molecules are further apart. So we get that really, really good blend, and this is why gasoline tends to be more stable with turbulent combustion chambers. But yeah, that's basically it. I'll clean the board off, and again, sorry, I should really go in a little bit more in depth when I just spring things out there. But we're going to put some papers on this sort of stuff. If anyone wants to get deeper into it, some studies and bits and pieces that will really break down these topics again. I think we actually going to build a page dedicated to different fuels and their makeups and all this sort of stuff, burn speeds. And I've got a ton of white papers there I've got to go through and get up there. Also, doing the cheat sheets. People are asking about the induction length cheat sheets. I've actually let the team down at Einstein. I was supposed to do some stuff from last week and I didn't even get to my videos, so they're actually waiting on me to do a little bit of work there. But what I thought I might actually do over the next month is actually build an induction page, and we can have it in order of runner length, CSA, and actually place the calculators in the page as well, rather than just in the calculator area. So that's a project that's been put on me that I'll try and get together for the guys. And also with the calculators, I've put an idea forward, and anyone who's used it, maybe you can give the feedback. But I thought a better way to structure the calculators, especially for the paid members, the golds and all that, was to have a category of cylinder head, so we can have all our CSA, the runner length, everything all in one section. And then we can have an intercooler section or thermal efficiency section or whatever, and break it up that way. Again, who knows? I'd love your feedback on this, guys, if you pop it in the comments. So I'll get this cleaned off, and I want to do a quick wrap up before we go any further, because next week, hopefully, I want to go into the fundamentals of camshaft and what's actually happening holistically, the whole system. So I'll clean this off. Let's do it. All right, so we're going to do a real quick breakdown on what we've learnt so far as induction goes. And we're going to start at point number one, which is the point of most importance. So what are the critical points in an induction, and where should we start? And the first place for me is always the combustion chamber, piston design, etc. The piston shape, which we haven't really talked about, and I might do a whole series on piston shape and how that also affects flame speed and LSA especially, and other things. But for me, valve and chamber is the most important part. So valve seat angles, everything. This is why you'll see in race stuff, we tend to go away from 45 seats to 50, 52, and so on, depending on what we're doing. Because rather than the seat being like this, the seat can be like that. It's more directed into the chamber. And yes, they will hurt low lift numbers, because on a 45 seat, if we lift 1 mil, it goes this distance. If we tilt that up on a 50 degree and we lift 1 mil, these two surfaces are actually closer together. So the discharge coefficient ring actually has less area for the same lift on race seats, like steeper angles. Again, this is something maybe we can do a whole series on that, but that's where I start. The valve chamber, etc. So valve seat, valve head, so on, into the bowl, into wherever you want the MCA, and that's how it brings us to our next point. The runner shape, CSA, must match the engine, especially the minimal cross-sectional area. And again, the math is pretty much done to death on that. Peak velocity numbers at the MCA dynamically are up around that 690 to 710 on high Mach heads. On something older, you might be as low as 620, 613. I think Chad uses and Darren, some of his, in 23 degree or early Cleveland type stuff. So we know that in order for us to use that inertia, we need airspeed, we need weight. Again, we're under a fluid, we're under pressure. We want to use this pressure to our advantage. So the runner, the shape, and everything must match the cubic capacity and the RPM we're doing. And the shape of the runner, obviously, the straighter and the less bends it has, the more efficient it will be. All right. And the bell, we've talked about this. The bell's job isn't to look pretty. And again, when we're talking bells, because occasionally I get comments, oh, you should have a trumpet. And generally what people are meaning with a trumpet, meaning a radius off the floor. That's not true. Realistically, the only reason we want a trumpet inside a plenum is, one, if we need more runner length, or two, if we need to compensate for a poor plenum design, because we'll have more flow around that dead area under the actual trumpet itself. But as far as flow goes into an engine, it doesn't matter whether it's a floor radius or a trumpet, because I hear this so often through the industry. I've heard it for 20 years. And you'll see even guys like Alex from Plasma Man, they've gone back to floor mounted radiuses because it's really not worth the effort to have them off the floor. Again, unless you are making up for a really, really short runner and you want to put some extra runner length because you're already too short, then that's what we need to do. So third harmonic, again, we'll have some cheat sheets up on Einstein. So basically just really, really average lengths that you can target that are going to work in 90% of all combinations. So that'll help the guys. So yeah, CSA, runner shape, and the bell. So again, I have heaps of people asking about the function of the bell, because again, I'm sure you've seen some of the studies saying elliptical do better, and they just don't, because they're using CFD. And I've talked about the limitations of RANs and some of the systems they run, because they just use lots of averages, and they're a very linear structure in the way they calculate airflow, and they're one directional, which an engine isn't. We have waves and velocity moving up and down. I call it a bidirectional duct is the what's here. And actually, John Carsey, I'll put this up right now. Oops, sorry. You can see the amount of turbulence up and down. He almost broke his finger doing that, because the velocity is so strong in there, moving up and down. Again, up until our peak torque point, we're pushing air back up into the inlet. We haven't developed enough airspeed, enough weight, again, coming back to our runner shape and size and getting the velocity high enough that we can overcome the force of the rising piston. And this is where we get into those density gradients. The pressure on top of the piston is rising. So the piston's coming up the bore, but the density on top of the piston is increasing as we're stacking more and more air, because the inertia that forces the air into the cylinder is basically stacking molecules up. So we end up with this massive dense zone on top of the piston as the piston's also coming up. We have two competing forces here. We have the atmospheric pressure that's tried to fill the low pressure over the downward stroke, and as it turns around, that velocity is now still flowing. So the weight of all that velocity, and again, if you want to feel the weight, put your hand out the window at 100 and you can feel that pressure on your hand. This is why land speed cars have to have titanium nose, because the pressure is so intense on the on the front of the vehicle that it'll melt different things. So I think the highest land speed guy now, and he has a multitude of pressure sensors over the car. It's a really, really good thing. I can't think of the name at the moment, but they've had to make a titanium nose cone for it just to deal with how much pressure and friction is getting created on that nose itself. So anyway, waves. So that brings us down to the basically the physical aspects of induction tuning. Now we get into the waves, and the waves is the second mechanism of the bell radius. This is why I say the bell only needs to be as big as to control the separation. And again, that is based on airspeed, because you get a ton of people saying, oh, Jake, you need a 1/2 inch, or you need a 5/8, you need this and that. Our fastest NAs in the world are on 5/16. So pro stock, super stock, really, really small radiuses. Again, it's about the airspeed at the bell. And the reason we want a small radius, and I've covered this before, is about the secondary mechanism, our wave tuning. We need that change in CSA fast. If we have a big radius, we just soften it, and we're adding molecules in the mix that we don't need. It's the rock in the pond. The further the wave gets out, the weaker the wave gets, because its molecular interaction is far greater. It's mixing with more molecules, and it's slowly depleting energy, okay? And the waves are, because again, we've had some comments on our Bain Racing page. I'm not sure why they don't even come on YouTube and watch the full video. About, oh, it's not a closing event, it's an open valve wave. We actually have multiple waves, and we've covered this: a quarter wave, our third harmonic wave, our Helmholtz, or spelled that wrong, and our exhaust mechanisms. But yeah, we have our closing wave, our open wave, our Helmholtz, and our exhaust waves. And there's a multitude of other little waves, our secondary mechanism. So you'll see that in some of your top NA stuff. A lot of your supercars get into the secondary mechanism. This is why they'll have parallel roofs on their plenum. And that height actually allows, so when the positive wave comes up the runner and brakes and throws the negative one back, that positive will go off and fill another cylinder. Now, this is why common plenum tunnel rams will generally make more horsepower than ITBs. So that does that. And something I missed the other day was to do with when we're talking about ITBs. I never covered the downfalls of slide valve. That's something I wanted to talk about. It's something that a few guys have seen. We had a setup years ago, and why obviously Formula One went to barrel or twin barrel now is because they get a better airstream with less turbulence in the mix. But the drama with side valve is if we're opening from one side, we really start to bias the flow in the port, and we also create massive negative areas and increase the drag dramatically, where if we start at the center of the port, and there were some aperture ones, I never mentioned those. I did see them years ago, so they were like a camera aperture. Again, really, really hard edges, very thin, lots of turbulence at part throttle, where the barrel type ones, they don't drop off straight away. So they've got a little bit more guidance, less turbulence, less drag. And the other thing I wanted to get into, which I probably haven't covered, I'm not sure, was the line of sight and the debate around line of sight, because a lot of people about line of sight, especially with the port design, 100%. But with manifolds, it can be a little bit tricky, especially when you start looking into the supercar stuff, especially with the Cosworth stuff with our dual plenum. Line of sight goes out the window, and in actual fact, they'll actually do better than a tapered plenum that has really, really good line of sight, because one, we can harness that secondary mechanism that I just talked about, the positive wave tuning filling other cylinders, because we're going to have a parallel roof and phase all cylinders at the same time, so they have the same wavelength on that secondary plenum harmonic. But two, because we have no bias in the throttle body, well, we do, but we can eliminate that because in the pre-chamber is tapered, and then we have a transition slot that feeds the manifold evenly. I might put a photo up, actually. So, wishing this beautiful Here's one we've done. We've done them for Holdens, 1UZs. We've got a couple of big horsepower ones in New Zealand that we did for Hughes Racing. He does a lot of the 1UZs, and what else does they do? I think they do the V12s as well, but they do the jet boats and the I think they're the dirt cars over there. I can't even remember. Anyway, what I wanted to cover also with the line of sight is sometimes you'll have to actually make the line of sight worse to improve the cylinder spread, especially with bias throttle positions. And this is why I say you really need to be careful with people that say, you know, everything's line of sight. Again, I hate hard and fast rules, because every time I come up with a rule, something breaks it, and then you start to understand the physics of why that's happening, and then you realize that it really comes down to each combination. Again, this is why I talk about variable airspeeds and different port designs liking different targets. But this is one where line of sight goes out the window, and I see this a lot. Parallel 90-degree throttle body on a tapered plenum or something like that. And the reason why this is far worse than having the throttle body up here, and also far worse than having the throttle body downhill, and this is something we do with our shotgun plenums. We actually found that 15 degrees down and extended off the engine gave us a far better spread across the engine. So a worse line of sight improved cylinder spread front to back. So from one of the fastest Holdens in Australia. I'll put some photos up of these anyway. But what we found was, with the throttle body here, we would wash that cylinder out. So the airspeed was too fast, and if the airspeed's too fast, we have too much inertia over that runner. So the runner's not going to fill that cylinder properly. Or if we cock it up a little bit here, then we get too much filling in this cylinder, or vice versa. And you'll see it in the EGTs or even the plug read. So what we've done, or what we found, was if we moved the throttle body away and tilted it down, it'd cause the high pressure to go across the roof. So we'd see more high pressure up here, and we get this sort of waterfall effect into the cylinders. And again, if the taper is right, we'll increase the velocity to the rear and get a nice balance across all the cylinders. But yeah, here we were shooting across the top of the runner, and that tends to affect the front cylinder. So that's where line of sight sort of goes out the window. But yeah, again, I don't like the hard and fast rules. So next week, I want to get into the fundamentals of obviously camshaft and expand it, but I just thought I'd do a quick rundown. And if anyone's got any questions, anything I missed, because I'm sure I have, put it in the comments and we can cover it in the next video. But yeah, I wanted to break that down a little bit so we can understand LSA, understand camshaft, understand how everything's working together. Because the biggest problem with all of this is if you change one little aspect, it changes the whole system. It's like a good recipe. I say this all the time. If you've got the perfect recipe, you can't just add more salt and expect it to go well. It's the same as anything. Compression, I had this argument probably 100 times over the years. I'd build absolutely perfect combos for people, and then they'd go, oh, we're going to put more comp in. I'm like, no, you can't do that. The cam, the runner, everything is designed for that. Oh, but this guy does it on a totally different engine platform. You need to be really, really careful when comparing boost, compression, camshaft of different engine combinations to totally other different engine combinations, because they don't cross over well, especially with when runner length comes into it. Compression, a really, really long runner with really, really high compression can absolutely be an absolute nightmare. As we reduce the induction length, we can increase the compression with increases of cam timing. Again, it's about getting that balance right between inertia, our feeling, where we want the feeling, our engine speed. Again, engine speed comes into compression ratios as well. It's all a balance. So I just wanted to give it a quick rundown so we know where we're at as far as why all these things are so important to get correct, and how this on flows into cam timing, especially once we start talking about blowdown phase and our inlet ram timing and how we're going to get that cam timing. And again, this will feed into LSA, duration, and our dynamic compression ratio under the LSA, right? So, all right, guys, I'll see you next time.